This is a continuation of another video, and if you haven't seen that, I'd recommend checking it out. I'll leave the link in the description. So picking up right where we left off, we've decided to humanize the heroes. Now we're going to be looking at the other side of the heroes, the villains. Villain development is something that can easily be considered pivotal to a series' success or failure. You can't have a series without a compelling, interesting set of villains that offset the main cast. It's no stranger that a majority of people do not actually connect with the protagonists, since life usually isn't all sunshine and rainbows, and friendship doesn't solve everything. Plenty of people connect more with the villains, with the dark side of life, and with the bad endings and tragic pasts. It just is more human. When you introduce a villain, the main focus should be obviously establishing the basics of their personality, their abilities, and later on, preferably near the end of their run, the motivation they have for whatever it is they do. I know some of you guys get mad when I do this, but a good example of this is Naruto. The villains of Naruto, namely the Akatsuki, are straight up one of the most iconic villains ever in the history of forever. Each one has unique beliefs and reasons for what they do, and none of them ever outstay their welcome and are usually killed off before the time of their introduction runs dry. This isn't the only story that includes them, but for now it's one of the most well-known, so it's the example. Now in the initial volumes of RWBY, the villains were still in their early stages. Unfortunately, right at the climax we are revealed everything about their past and their motivations, and from there they stagnate for the rest of the series. We have Emerald, who is an abandoned child that sought a family and found support in Cinder. We have Mercury, an abused child who's raised in a self-proclaimed nightmare, decided to fight back, and then embarked on an impromptu journey with Cinder and the gang. We have Cinder, who appears to have some form of power complex, where she was once, at some point, powerless and abused, presumably. Now she hungers for power. We have Adam, a violent leader of the White Fang that seeks to right the wrongs that humanity has done to the Faunus, arguably a noble cause. We have Roman, a thief dubbed a rat of the city and arguably a criminal mastermind who wants nothing more than to survive. We have Neo, another presumed rat of the city that was most likely taken in by Roman and feels some sort of debt to him, not too unlike Emerald. Now normally, these are all a solid basis for interesting villain development. However, we are told this in a span of a couple episodes. Now, assuming RWBY is not the only anime you watch, what usually happens to the villains in the shows that you enjoy watching? In mine, you typically find out their true motivation or backstory moments before they die, or after they die through exposition from another character, preferably another villain. The only example of this isn't really an example at all. Roman and Neo confront RWBY during the fall of Beacon, and during this encounter we have Roman telling RWBY the facts. The real world is hard and cold and doesn't care how happy you want things to be. He expresses his want to survive, finally giving some backstory to his character as a whole, and immediately after that, not even a second after, he is eaten and presumably killed. I don't know about you, but that kind of pissed me off. Roman's character as a whole was never a point of serious interest for me until he started speaking some truth, and he started making some sense. I would have liked a snippet of his own past, something to justify his fear of the forces at work, not just instant death. We have Mercury and Emerald's backstory seemingly having no relevance in future volumes, and instead they stick around through volumes 4 to 6, never being defeated or killed in a way that gives a meaningful completion to their character arcs. We see Emerald maybe briefly consider that Cinder does not care for her, but I feel that this was something she should have known, and maybe even accepting that would have made her that much more of a real person. Breaking down and throwing a fit because the woman that saved you, clearly for your semblance alone, doesn't care about you, it just seems off. Mercury's backstory is explained during his and Emerald's 3 minutes of total screen time, and the character is almost entirely justified in literally everything he does, and the viewers even feel bad for him for the fact that he has had to struggle to keep up with the powerhouses around him. I made a full video on Mercury already, Link in description if you haven't seen it. I'd recommend checking that out. Adam's character was melted down into an abusive, irrational man instead of an esteemed leader that he was originally played out to be. He disregards the cause he fights for to pursue Blake, and in doing so undoes everything he had hoped to achieve. I also made a video on Adam as well, link in description below. Cinder's character longs for power and only power, and somehow also develops this obsessive need to kill RWBY, since the girl injured her. Not too unheard of in the villain community, but I mean, I originally liked Cinder as a character, but ever since Volume 3 she has just kind of dissolved into this generic, sexy one-liner machine, and it's just boring whenever she's on screen, and I was really hoping they would have killed her off by now, but they still haven't. They even killed her off and then brought her back immediately. Neo? Well, Neo doesn't really do much of anything other than kick ass, so we might have some hope for her, honestly. So here's what I mean when I say fixing the villains and stuff. Let's do a quick little rewrite of Volume 3 in a way that I feel that the villains would actually be, well, villains. Mercury and Emerald. They are going to either die or be established as stronger. Yeah, I love these characters, but they should also have had like a serious confrontation scene, either at the base of the tower with the entirety of the students gathered there, preferably defending Cinder while she did whatever it was she did, or against Crow, Glinda, and James. It would have been more interesting for me to see if they had managed to hold them off, or seriously injure some of these players. This would have been a chance to raise them to the level of the villains in Volume 4, with having these experienced players claim that they are a lot stronger than kids their age. That or they should have died, and the only reason they should have died is due to the serious power gap created by the villains of Volumes 6 to 4. Which makes all the villains before them seem like pushovers. This has always been one of my points, and I always stress it. If you're going to introduce new villains, then you have to get rid of your old ones, or at least bring the old ones up to their level. Otherwise, nothing works out. We either use the character, establish their true strength, or kill them off. It was already implied that Mercury was on a level equal to or greater than Pyranikos, the strongest student in Beacon and arguably one of the strongest players in the game so far. It would not have been too difficult to kind of up the ante and establish Mercury and Emerald as superiors. The best way that I can describe that is, you take Neo, right? Neo, when she was introduced, she legit beat the living shit out of one of the main characters effortlessly, and it was awesome because she's just on this whole other level. Now, all we needed to do was establish that Mercury and Emerald were also on that level, but instead we don't. Now we move on to Roman. He might have reached his apex, so the death scene was kind of acceptable, but for Christ's sake, make it a main character. RWBY, Crow, Winter, or Ironwood. Hell, Mercury and Emerald were introduced tying up loose ends Roman left behind. Would it have been too difficult for him to barely escape with his life, and then end with Emerald and Mercury closing in on him in the final scene, possibly uttering something about, their initial exchange, how it was kind of back and forth and rude or something like that? They could have had a really good witty one-liner back and forth here. Mercury could have said something about exterminating the rats once they've reached their usefulness or something, like his father had taught him to tie up loose ends with people. I don't know, something like that. It would have been a lot more interesting. Instead of just, nom 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 nom. Adam should have either had a full fight, one that establishes his own power and ability, or should have been in direct conflict with Weiss Schnee, whom he could have presumably defeated, and just before the final blow, Winter would step in, declare Adam's crimes, and sentence him to death, and their fight could have been left on a cliffhanger. We could have just presumed that either both of them died or one of them died, but we wouldn't know who until the later volumes, and you could reintroduce one of the characters. I really don't know. I'm just kind of spitballing here, but I think a clash and a fade to black would have been a lot more appropriate, with Weiss waking up in her kingdom crypt instead of waking up next to her dad. It would have been a lot better if they had left that kind of cliffhanger that nobody knows what happened to Winter or Adam. But my overall point is that if you are going to introduce new players, then you have to get rid of the old ones. And sometimes you can get rid of them appropriately, or you can just write an abrupt character change that doesn't make any sense if you want to. Or you can just keep them out of the spotlight for the rest of the series. What was that saying? Chekhov's gun? If in the opening act you place a gun there, then it must be fired by the second or third act. Otherwise, don't put it there, because it misleads the audience. I'm applying this to villains because, fuck it. If you are going to introduce a villain character, they either need to be defeated or killed in the following scenes. Otherwise, don't introduce them. When it comes to movies, anime, or even novels, I tend to agree with the villain side of things more. Maybe that's just because I'm a pessimist, I don't know, but RWBY is its own series, but I can't help comparing it to other ones because that's what I do. Whenever I compare RWBY to another series, I'm not telling RWBY to be more like the series. Instead, I'm just giving an example of the writing, because in a lot of series, writing is amazing, and writing can make or break a series. To make my point about villains, we're going to go back to the Akatsuki of Naruto. Don't cry now. After a lengthy battle, Pain, the leader of the Akatsuki, has finally managed to capture Naruto and engages in some small talk for the sole purpose of mocking Naruto's beliefs. Pain asks Naruto what he wants, to which Naruto claims he wants to kill Pain. Pain just claims that he wants peace. Naruto berates Pain for after killing his friends and destroying his village, Pain has no right to speak of peace. Pain responds with how the leaf killed his friends, his family, and destroyed his village. Why was it only fair for the leaf to get revenge and not for Pain to get revenge? Pain's entire speech, linked in the description below also, finally outlines exactly how you make a compelling, interesting villain. It follows the rule as well, as shortly after everything is revealed about his character, he is defeated and dies. Now, it's a special thing for me really when you can connect with a villain, but maybe you wouldn't go to the far extremes that they've gone. You can understand why they feel justified in what they do, but at the same time, you, for whatever reason, have a moral high ground. Good for you, good for us, we're all not sociopaths. However, when a villain is just reduced to a kind of a schoolyard bully outset, or they take this obsessive, terrible turn for no reason, the character is just wasted. I talked about this in my Adam video, and I talked about this in my Mercury video, and I even touched on this in the Salem video. A lot of these characters had potential, but strictly through the writing, they've fallen apart. And that's probably going to be the next part, the writing. This should wrap up this part, and if you haven't already, watch the other videos where I specifically explain what I feel is wrong with certain villains in the show. As always, guys, I usually thank subscribers, but this is all being made kind of in the same day. So, obviously, I might not say your name or thank you because I haven't checked it yet. So, sorry. Check next video, I guess. And just as a bit of fun, how would you guys have written these characters? Would you have changed them, or would you have kept them the same? Now, a lot of you guys have been saying that you feel, yes, you can change RWBY, and hypothetically, in most cases, I would tend to agree that maybe. However, as it stands, the writers, producers, and directors, all of RWBY, apparently they don't really like listening to fans too much, and they don't really like responding to criticism, as their criticism is usually one-sided and not really beneficial in any way. So you can say that we can change things, but at the moment I think that the only people that can change RWBY for the better are the directors, the writers, and the producers. Everyone else, even if the animation is amazing and better than ever, if the story isn't there, and the story was originally what captured me, if the story's not there, then there's no saving it. But we'll see. We'll see if by the end of this I come to the conclusion that it can be saved, or that it can't be saved. I know a lot of major people who usually talk about anime are dropping RWBY because, well, it's that bad. But I won't. I won't drop RWBY, because Monty Oum deserves better than that.